This week on Political Capital, will the third time be the charm? Republican Congressman Ron Paul of Texas is making his third bid for the presidency. Will his libertarian views and a Tea Party era resonate? We'll ask him. And on the last word, the Sarah Palin juggernaut rolls on and may be over some other 2012 contenders. We begin the show with 2012 Republican presidential candidate Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's talk about legislative matters first. The debt ceiling, as you know, is up there right now. We're running out of money. The Treasury says August 2. You say it's no big deal. I mean, no, the debt ceiling's a big deal, but this urgency is no big deal. Do you think Congress will pass an extension of the debt ceiling by August 2?
I do, and that was the type of prediction I made about the CR. Remember? It went up to the last minute, and nobody knows exactly what will happen. But I said, yeah, they'll probably do it at the last minute. And I think that's what will happen. It'll go up to the last minute, and they will raise the debt ceiling. But the reason I'm not going to vote for it, and I don't think it's going to be a catastrophe, because I think the catastrophe comes regardless, because as long as they encourage more spending, then we go over a cliff. So I want to stop us.
Your Speaker, John Boehner, says he will absolutely adamantly insist on $1 of spending reduction for every $1 of the debt ceiling go up. Number one, do you take that seriously, and will it make a difference?
I don't take it seriously. Even in the 80s, when our good friend Ronald Reagan had a tax increase, which a lot of people forget about, he said he wanted $2 of cuts for every $1. Nothing happened, and the deficit exploded. So do you think the American people are going to believe that we're going to cut in the future? The only budget that counts is this year, not what's happening next year, the year after, a 5-year program or 10-year programs. That's all pie in the sky talking, and the only thing that counts is what is going to be this year. This year, our obligations, when you add up everything, $5 trillion, additional obligations.
So therefore, the idea of putting a spending cap on that takes effect in 10 years, that wouldn't have much appeal to you?
No, I think it's too little, too late.
Right.
And nobody's going to believe it. And you know what they argue is they want to prevent the default. You know, we don't want to not pay our bills, but we're defaulting constantly. All governments, when they get this much debt, default. But they don't default by not paying the bills. We'll always pay the bills. The default comes from the devaluation of the currency, and we devalue our currency. So the inflation rate now is at 6%, and therefore people are losing their purchasing power. So the common person, the average person, middle class, and the poor, especially the people who lose their jobs, we're defaulting on them all the time. So I think other people ought to wait in line. If we have to, just pay the bills as we can. But I don't want to keep piling on the unemployment and the high inflation rate and the default on the average person.
Let's carry some of these issues over to the presidential campaign that you're waging. Now, you have a pretty good sense of what the field is. There's a couple of people it's not certain of it. On these kind of issues, spending and debt, are you different than the rest of the field or some of the other candidates? You've commented on a few, like Mitt Romney.
Yeah, I think if you just listen to words, you'll say, oh, he said what Ron says. He says what Ron said.
Right.
But I think there will be a credibility gap, because a lot of people who watched me 4 years ago said, boy, it sounded good what you were saying. So I went and checked your record, and their eyes would get open and say, you actually voted that way.
You don't see anybody else who has that kind of a record right now.
I'm always amazed. I'm impressed, and I'm pleased, because very often they do it. And I think they'll be saying more things, because they talk about printing press money, and they're even talking about coming back overseas and things. But no, I think there's something that has to do with credibility, and they know that I'm leveling with them, and I've done it all along, and I've expressed these concerns for 20, 30 years.
Let me ask you about a couple issues to see if you think you can get that on the agenda during these GOP presidential debates, one of which is foreign troops, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya. It looks to me like most of the others are taking the John McCain line as opposed to the Ron Paul.
Yeah, and politically they're making a big mistake. Of course, they don't think they're making a mistake, as far as foreign policy goes. But right now, there's big debates. Every week there's a debate, and the people are with me on this. I've been arguing to bring the troops home now I didn't want them to go in the first place, and I want them to come home.
You think you can force this on the agenda during these debates?
I think the people will force it on.
You do?
Think, the people now know that we can't pay it.
Right.
And a lot of conservatives are coming coming in our direction, it's because they can't pay it. And I've always said over the years that I'll win this argument, not because they'll listen to some really great speech of mine, but we'll run out of money. That's how all great nations and empires end. They can't afford it any longer, and that is what's happening right now. And I have proposals that are different. As much as I'm opposed to all the spending, I'd cut across the board if I have to. But I said if you want to do it on purposely and in deliberate fashion, have priorities. And my priorities, you cut off all foreign welfare and foreign militarism and corporate welfare before you go after child health care.
Right.
And that sells. And you don't have to just address, health care for poor people rather than looking at this atrocious spending that we do overseas.
And you would bring home troops from Afghanistan, Libya, and Pakistan.
Yeah, because I believe in a strong national defense, and I think that hurts our defense.
But you bring home all of them.
I'd bring them all home, sure,
okay.
Because we have no reason to be there. I mean, the soldiers we have in Korea, they went there when I was in high school.
Yeah.
How long are we going to stay there?
Another issue, the Federal Reserve, it's been a pet issue of yours, too. Do you see any other candidate who's talking about questions like a full audit of the Federal Reserve or nominating or rather confirming Federal Reserve?
There's no way, but they won't laugh as much as they did last time.
They won't.
Last time they'd laugh, and they'd scorn my foreign policy, and they'd laugh at my monetary policy. They won't laugh any longer. Just think of the difference on the attitude of the people now about the Federal Reserve. They're on the people's
You think you're the
radar.
Federal Reserve in retreat? You have.
I mean, have you ever anticipated over the years that Bernanke would be holding press conference defending his position? He can't defend it because it's a failed policy. You can't print money and get yourself out of trouble. People know that. Grade school kids know this. That you can't use monopoly money and make it work. So it's a failed system, and people are starting to realize this. And the people know now that you have a lot more people to blame than high labor costs and high profits. You go to the Federal Reserve for the business cycle, the financial bubbles, and the crashes, and then the bailing out of trillions of dollars for special
interests. Do you think you can win legislatively in this Congress on any of those issues, though, whether it's the audit or whether it's the Congress?
Well, we're winning on the transparency of the Fed. I mean, we have a long way to go, and we're holding our hearings, but there's a lot of resistance. So, no, we'll win when the system comes unglued and when they destroy the dollar. Fiat currencies last for a while, but eventually they self-destruct, and you have to start over again.
Congressman, let me ask you this. There are establishment candidates. I think it's fair to say that Mitt Romney and maybe John Huntsman, even Tim Pawlenty are establishment candidates. And you differentiate yourself clearly from them. There are also some others who claim that they're populist conservatives, anti-Fed, anti-spending, the way you are. I think particularly Michelle Bachmann, who you serve with in the House, and Sarah Palin. Is there a dime's worth of difference between Ron Paul and Bachmann and Palin?
Well, I would think so. I mean, just maybe our approaches and the length of time and our interests and our intensity and all. But I think this shows the individuals you mentioned, the ones that are closer to the people and more populist oriented. I think the fact that they're moving in this direction and now starting to take a different position on troops and even on the Patriot Act and privacy, they're starting to move in this direction.
Do you understand Sarah Palin's economics
no,
agenda?
I haven't studied them.
All right. Congressman Ron Paul will be watching you a lot over the next 6 months. It's going to be a fascinating campaign. Thank you for being with us.